Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to welcome you to today's event on a topic of urgent global importance: migrants, refugees, and trafficking in persons. Today, we come together to address one of the most complex and pressing challenges of our time: the intersection of migration, refugee flows, and the scourge of human trafficking. And according to the most recent IOM, International Organization for Migration 2024 report, there are approximately 281 million international migrants worldwide. Many of these people are not simply seeking better opportunities, but are fleeing conflict, persecution, and poverty. Among them, according to UNHCR, are more than 43 million refugees who have been forced from their homes due to violence and instability. But behind these numbers lies a darker reality: the vulnerability of migrants and refugees to human trafficking. Exploited through forced labor, sexual exploitation, child trafficking, and even organ trafficking, millions of people fall victims to what can only be described as modern-day slavery. Today, more than 50 million people worldwide are victims of human trafficking, with traffickers generating a shocking $236 billion annually from their heinous crimes. It's a tragic reminder that in moments of desperation, the most vulnerable are often targeted by ruthless traffickers who take advantage of their plight. This event is more than a conversation, it's a call to action. And I would like to say that indeed we could say we must explore how do we better protect migrants and refugees, address the root causes of trafficking, and strengthen international cooperation to combat these injustices. Whether through stronger laws, better protection, or comprehensive support systems, the time to act is now. As we gather here today, let us not lose sight of the human dimension of this crisis. Every person trafficked, every migrant exploited, represents a failure to uphold basic human dignity and rights. This is not just a legal or political issue, it's a moral one. And it calls on all of us, especially governments, international organizations, civil society, spiritual leaders, and individuals to act. And I would like to say that actually, as a lawyer, and I'm also speaking also in presence of the International Institute of Humanitarian Law, I would have two specific proposals to make. And one is to reaffirm and to insist for the implementation of existing treaties dealing with humanitarian law, human rights, refugee law, migrants, labor work, and also, of course, international criminal law. And the second is to say, yes, we need to work together and to do as we did at the end of last century, to build coalitions. To build coalitions, it was the case for the Rome Statute in 1998 for the International Criminal Court, and it was the case also for 1997 Ottawa Convention against anti-personnel landmines, and those coalitions achieved what many people thought was impossible. And today, we must consider a similar coalition to end human trafficking to end modern slavery, not only in today's circumstances, but also in emerging challenges. And when I speak about emerging challenges, I would like also to mention artificial intelligence. So, I don't have any ready-made solution, but definitely those are two issues we need to reflect and to find ways to act. And actually to find ways to, again, promote existing international law and complement, update, fill loopholes of these instruments and find ways and means to implement them fully. So, actually, that's all what I want to say as an introduction, but I urge all of us to reflect on our role in ending these human rights violations and to seek concrete solutions to defend the dignity and safety of those most at risk. And thank you for being here. I look forward to our shared commitment to making a real difference. And I must say, I'm very happy about all the speakers of this panel. And of course, I will shortly introduce the Nuncio, but I'm very happy that you made it, Vincent Costel, and that I'm also sent someone. So the moderator, my friend Claudio Del Fabro, will present them, introduce them in detail. But now it's my privilege to and honor to introduce the first speaker, His Excellency Archbishop Ettore Ballestero, permanent observer of the Holy See in Geneva. He has a distinguished diplomatic career with the Holy See, entered the diplomatic service of the Holy See in 1996, and served in the pontifical representations in South Korea, Mongolia, and the Netherlands. And in 2009, Pope Benedict XVI appointed him Undersecretary for Relations with States of the Secretariat of State of the Holy See, and then in 2013, he received episcopal consecration, was Apostolic Nuncio to Colombia, and then was Apostolic Nuncio in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and then on the 2023, he is now, since 2023, is Apostolic Nuncio in Geneva. Thank you, Excellency, for being here. You have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Rote. Thank you very much for the invitation, distinguished participants and speakers, of course. It is an honor for me to be here and to exchange views on this issue, which, as Ambassador Rote has just mentioned, it is a scourge, not just with juridical implications and humanitarian implications, but also, of course, first and foremost, moral dimensions. As the Ambassador just said, according to the ILO, an estimated 50 million people are currently trapped in modern slavery across the globe, often working for little or no compensation. Among them, the most vulnerable, children and young girls, are disproportionately affected, making up nearly 1/3 of all victims, which means about between 15 and 20 million persons trafficked. Human trafficking, in its essence, is a denial on multiple levels of the inherent dignity of every person created in the image and likeness of God, and a practice which disfigures this human dignity in two profound ways: by stripping its victims of their freedom and inherent worth, and at the same time dehumanizing its perpetrators as they become participants in a grievous moral failure. When a person is treated as an object to be bought and sold, the image of God in both the victim and the perpetrator is desecrated. As we know, this is not a new phenomenon, unfortunately. Trafficking of persons has long been a dark shadow over human history. But today it has taken on tragic dimensions before our eyes. It's a crime against humanity that transcends borders, one that affects every corner of the globe, and it exceeds the competence of any one community or country and cannot be met by commitment alone. This is why I like very much what Ambassador has just said. This is not just a conversation, this is a call to action, and an action that can be implemented only if we do it and if we work all together. To confront this scourge, we must dismantle the complex systems that enable trafficking through decisive practical steps towards social, economic, and political transformation. It's a global phenomenon and requires a global response. I'm very happy that we will hear from real experts who have worked tirelessly to expose all the transnational nature of this criminal enterprise. It's a network of joint criminal activities that operate across borders, using deception, coercion, and force to profit from the misery of others. Yet focusing solely on bringing traffickers to justice is not enough. That has to be done, this is essential, but this is just part of the solution. Equally important is to prioritize the well-being of the victims, many of whom, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, have endured unspeakable horrors. Pope Francis has underscored the essential need to support, accompany, and reintegrate the victims of human trafficking into our communities and assist them in the process of healing and the recovery of their self-esteem. For all those who have been or who had the chance to deal with this tremendous scourge and met some victims, the psychological consequences on them are terrible, and these wounds can last for decades. Victims must not be treated as criminals or marginalized further, but rather embraced with compassion, restored to their dignity, and given the opportunity to rebuild their lives. It's our moral obligation to walk with them on their journey to recovery. And the root causes of human trafficking are numerous and deeply intertwined with many other challenges facing our world today. We know that human trafficking thrives on the margins, on the edges of society where poverty, conflict, and desperation leave people vulnerable to exploitation. Migrants, refugees, and those fleeing war or persecution, especially women, especially children, are particularly at risk. And the criminal networks that prey on these vulnerable people are, as we know, constantly evolving, requiring us to remain as vigilant and adaptable in our responses. One way to address this scourge is to ensure that migration is safe, legal, and orderly. Migrants should never be forced to choose between staying in danger or embarking on a perilous journey where they risk exploitation. With this in mind, I would like also to suggest some concrete actions, since it is a call to action, to propose some points that we, at least on the files of the Holy See, based on the network of Catholic organizations that are dealing with this issue, have appeared to be of particular relevance. First and foremost, states should expand and enhance legal pathways for safe, voluntary migration and resettlement. This is one of the issues now of the ongoing executive committee of the UNHCR, because while states have the right to control their borders, they must do so in accordance with international law, including the principle of non-refoulement, which prohibits the return of refugees to danger. The more legal alternatives we offer, the less likely migrants are to fall victim to traffickers or smugglers. This is not only a legal obligation, but it is first of all a moral imperative. Countries with significant labor migrant outflows should protect their citizens by implementing robust pre-departure education systems and regulating employment recruiters. By ensuring that migrants are informed of their rights and that recruiters are held accountable, we would reduce the risks of forced labor and trafficking. Likewise, states receiving labor migrants should enact policies to prevent exploitation. Legislation should forbid the withholding of passports, guarantee access to justice regardless of status, and ensure regular, fair payment through secure channels like personal bank accounts, which is the case already being implemented in some countries of special interest and concern. Special attention must be given to children. States should comply with their obligation, as we heard earlier, to respect and to fully implement existing conventions and international legal instruments, like the Convention on the Rights of the Child, when they enact domestic legislation to address the vulnerable situation of unaccompanied children or minors separated from their family. Detention is never in the best interest of a child. Alternatives such as foster care and appropriate guardianship must be prioritized, with separate processing centers to protect the most vulnerable. All children deserve to be treated with dignity and care. Migrants and refugees must also be guaranteed basic social protection, starting with access to health care. Regardless of status, they should receive primary care upon arrival. Health, I know it's a challenge, but health is a fundamental human right that cannot be denied based on migration status. Furthermore, we should prevent statelessness, ensuring that all individuals have legal recognition and protection under the law. Integration is crucial. States should facilitate the local integration of migrants, asylum seekers and refugees, recognizing that cohesive, inclusive communities benefit everyone. This not only strengthens societies, but promotes solidarity and mutual respect. Lastly, the international community should provide greater support to countries hosting large number of refugees, particularly those fleeing armed conflicts. These countries often shoulder an overwhelming burden, and global cooperation is essential to assure that all people, regardless of the migratory status, receive the assistance and opportunities they deserve. I think in conclusion, before giving the floor to all these experts, I think it's a call to intensify the efforts in this struggle. Human trafficking is not merely a stain that can be washed away. It's a deep wound carved in the very fabric of our shared humanity. We must address not only the symptoms, but also the underlying causes: poverty, inequality, violence, and the lack of opportunity that make individuals vulnerable to exploitation. It's not enough to punish the perpetrators. We should also restore the dignity of the victims. And most importantly, we should confront this blight on human dignity and do it all together. The Church, as you know, remains steadfast in its commitment to continue walking with victims, offering them care, compassion, and support, practical support. Yet we cannot succeed alone. It will take a concerted effort of government, civil society, faith-based organizations, academia, and individuals alike to eradicate this scourge and restore dignity to all who have suffered in its grip. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for these insightful remarks and concrete proposals. And definitely will contribute also to our discussion of today. And now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Claudio Del Fabro, who is the director of the Refugee Law courses of the International Institute of Humanitarian Law in San Remo, co-organizer of this event, and who will take over as moderator. Claudio.
Thank you very much, Professor Bede, for the kind invitation to join this distinguished panel today. We have now prepared for you presentations from colleagues who are actually working in the field and in the design of policies related to trafficking and smuggling. First, in order for the keynote, it is my honor to introduce Mr. Vincent Cochetel. Mr. Cochetel has been appointed in Tunis as UNHCR Special Envoy for the Central and Western Mediterranean situation as of 1st of June 2017, and since March 2024, he's based in Geneva, assuming the same functions and assisting the Division of International Protection of UNHCR with other mixed movement routes. Mr. Cochetel joined UNHCR in 1986 and managed UNHCR field offices in Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. He also participated in several emergency operations in Asia, West Africa, and Europe. In September 2002, he was appointed as Director of the Investigation Unit of Inspectors General's Office at UNHCR headquarters here in Geneva. In May 2005, he became Deputy Director of UNHCR Division of International Protection and Director of the Resettlement Service. Mr. Cochetel served as the UNHCR Regional Representative for the United States of America and the Caribbean, based on Washington, D.C., and from August 2010 to February 2013. He assumed between 2013 and 2017 the functions of Director of the Bureau of Europe of UNHCR and UNHCR's Regional Refugee Coordinator for the refugee crisis in Europe for 2015 and 2017. It is an honor for us to have you here, Mr. Cochetel. He's going to be presenting to us the topic of the increasing risk of trafficking in the context of reinforced border measures, the reliance on smugglers by refugees, and how refugees should not be penalized for irregular entry. And at the same time, he's going to be providing us examples of the work of UNHCR in this sphere. Thank you very much, Mr. Cochetel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to share with you some observation this morning. First of all, thank you also for being here, for your commitment to being here. I know there was a lot of concurrent events taking place at the same time, not the best timing, not the best location, but thank you very much for demonstrating your interest and commitment for the topic. So I'd like to say I'm not an expert. I've been almost 40 years with UNHCR, long beyond. I'm not an expert, but what I'd like to share with you is a bit of my feeling. You know, some of the lessons learned over those years, and some of the recent trends I have observed. On coming here this morning, I'd say, well, it should not be just another event. You know, what is new? What is new? Do we see sign of hope? And how do we approach things a bit differently? So the first lessons I've learned over those years, and saw that increasingly during the pandemic time, was yes, reinforced border measures, border protection measures, automatically increase the need for smugglers. Hard border measures create business opportunity for smugglers. That's logical. People will continue to move. It's a market-driven business. I'm not saying, and we are not saying, that reinforced border measures are not necessary. States are sovereign. They may decide to harden border control. But then we need to look at the solutions. And the solution must be better identification of victims of trafficking, victims of some of the smugglers at the border, And we need also to keep in mind that in the case of refugee, people should not be penalized just by the mere fact we have crossed the border irregularly. Article 31 of the Convention is clear. If people report without delay, if they show good cause for their illegal entry, their irregular entry that is motivated by a fear of persecution, they should not be penalized. So, and we saw it with the war of aggression on Ukraine, when refugees benefit from protection-sensitive entry on admission system into neighboring countries, the risk of trafficking is diminished. So that's the first lessons learned. I mean, there is nothing we can do about, deciding whether states want to opt for stricter border control measures, but there is an automaticity in consequence in terms of increased need for smugglers. The second lessons learned is states are always too late in their response. Because states are convinced they can do it alone. Only law enforcement measures to combat smuggling and trafficking will do the trick, but states are always too late. As I said, it's a market driven by demand, and smugglers and traffickers are quicker than states to adapt to this changing economy and business opportunities. They love crises. They prey on those crises. I don't know if you read that article yesterday in the press showing that many of the Syrians fleeing the situation in Lebanon, Syrian refugees, they are now using smugglers to go back to Syria. They want to avoid the official border crossing for the men, to avoid immediate enlistment into the Syrian army. So the smugglers know there is a business opportunity. So they offer services to those people to go back to Syria without being noticed. So they prey on vulnerable victims every time there is crisis. Another thing I realized during a field trip in Djibouti is to see people returning by boats from Yemen, Ethiopian, mostly migrants, some refugees among them, but mostly migrants, coming back from Yemen. So they went to Yemen from Djibouti using smugglers. They were confronted to trafficking risk in Yemen, could not make it to Saudi Arabia to look for work there, and then they have to buy back, contract another smuggler to go back to Djibouti. So, they double dip on the trip, business opportunities are available, and they provide services. And when I say states are always too late, traffickers are much more clever, they adapt. A couple of years ago, it's now 5-6 years ago, in East Horn of Africa, you had children recruiting children, recruiting clients in refugee camps, in refugee settlements, in IDP camps, in urban areas, with that motto, go now, pay later. Very attractive for many people, go now, pay later. If it's free, why I should not try? Of course, it was a lie. Next border you cross, people are forced into labor, into other form of exploitation, sexual exploitation, and so on, and all the way to the intended destination for some, but all the way on that route, they have paid, they have to coerce, they are in bondage situation vis-à-vis those traffickers. But very attractive scheme. Now, we see the development of that now in Senegal, on that route leading to the dangerous journey, 8 days by boat to go to the Canary Islands. Smugglers tell the people, go now, pay later. Some people can't believe it and start questioning what's behind. But there's nothing behind. This time it's really free. The crossing is free for some of them. But in Spain, recruiters are there to make sure they pay back. And put pressure on the family back home in the community. So it's free to go. But the exploitation is going to last for a number of years, irrespective of the place of destination of those people. So why can't be also as innovative? Why can't we be all together more innovative to adapt to the response and to the offer smugglers and traffickers put along those routes? And I think that's a question for all of us. And one of the elements of the response is we need, yes, a robust law enforcement approach, but not just a law enforcement approach. We have to work on prevention in a much smarter manner. Previous speakers spoke about legal pathways. Yes, that's one of them. But legal pathways will never address all the needs for movement. This narrative that more legal pathways will reduce irregular movement. Yeah, it's a nice political talking point. I make it also myself. But is it true? Do we have evidence to back that up? I leave it to you. Third lessons learned. Encampment policies. I'm just leaving the ExCom room. I'm hearing about some states saying, well, yes, we will expand the camp, we will have new settlement. Yeah, will that fix the problem? No. Encampment creates conditions for trafficking. When rights are restrained, people need to feed their family. They don't survive on the assistance we provide them with the generous funding you give us. This is not true. They survive because they find little jobs here and there and often get exploited. And so encampment, especially protracted encampment, as the encampment situation lasts in average 19 years on the African continent. And protracted encampment creates conditions conducive to trafficking. And on the same for many reservations that states have passed when they ratified the 1951 Convention, restriction on key economic social rights. And I've not heard at the ExCom about states lifting those reservations. As long as you maintain those strict encampment policies on those strict limitations in terms of access, for instance, to the right to work, well, then be on offer. Outside of the camp, there will be an offer, and people will get crushed in trafficking networks. So that's an area where we need to move, and we talked a lot during this executive committee about sustainable programming, not having parallel system, schooling camps, school outside of camps, having only one system to which refugee can be enlisted. And this is to reduce that vulnerability to trafficking and reduce to that temptation of it's going to be better elsewhere, or let's embark on those dangerous journeys. So, but let's look at that. The fourth lessons learned is that it's also imperative that the discussion on trafficking, that we acknowledge that some victims of trafficking never move beyond their national borders. Many people are too poor, too vulnerable to afford what the smugglers ask them. But it doesn't mean that they are free from exploitation. I think at the level of the Global Protection Cluster, UNHCR, in partnership with IOM and others, has been looking at that, has been trying to work on some pilot project. We know that in 11 countries, protection against trafficking has been seen as a priority. And I think it's important that we focus on those areas, on those pilots, and try to draw some lessons that could be useful for other IDP situations. Finally, the last lessons I'd like to draw is year after year. I'm always an optimistic of the will. I'm a bit of a pessimistic of the reason. I don't see progress. We came up recently with a report where we documented what services, protection services, are available in 14 countries along that route leading to the central Mediterranean Sea. And we've done this survey a couple of times, and year after year we see services decreasing. So less services. And then services are not located where the risks are the highest. The risks are the highest in border areas where humanitarian actors are not present. And we don't need to be present everywhere. And we don't have the resources to be present everywhere. But let's work with the local authorities, those who can identify. Let's recognize the local authorities can be the first responder and make the adequate referrals. But along many of these routes you have black spots. Nobody is available. No services are available. And year after year it reduces. So we're not better. and but we need to concentrate on areas where we can make the difference. We need to concentrate on areas where it's not convenient for us to work. But on those areas that migrants and refugees are going to use, are going to meet the traffickers, and are going to experience problems. I think it's also important to recognize that more services for the victims of trafficking will not solve everything. It will not stop trafficking. So of course you need law enforcement action in parallel, on robust law enforcement action. But it needs to be more balanced in the approach. And what I see is mainly law enforcement action that is driven towards containment at certain border, return, Article 9 of the Protocol on Trafficking in Person. I see very little happening in terms of Article 6 and 7, all the services that should be available to victims of trafficking, including access to justice. So again, it's our collective responsibility to go back to basics, provide those services, collaborate with the law enforcement, but have this rule-based approach to combating trafficking and protecting victims of trafficking along these routes. Those networks are transnational. They operate across communities, and having state or national center action will not work. They're more equipped than states. They move and they work across the border more easily. So we need to take that into consideration the way we approach that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kostel. I mean, it was very enlightening, at least for me, to hear very concrete examples from different areas, and these words of realism that smuggling and trafficking are businesses. And we have to be pragmatic, and we have to be quick, and that law enforcement per se, law enforcement towards returns and containment is not enough. Law enforcement also speaks about guaranteeing access to justice for the victims. And then there were some very concrete examples that I promise I will use in our courses in San Remo as well. So I'm taking notes to hopefully you don't have copyrights on that, but it's on, they go now and pay later as a first step towards trafficking, and that exploitation doesn't happen only at the place of destination, but it's on the whole route, and some of them never reach the area of destination, and that some of victims of trafficking never even manage to cross the international border and leave their own country. And these are the internally displaced people who are victims of trafficking. Thank you very much. I'm sure there will be, and I can see also in the chat, because this is also presented online, and I see that we have some questions. Allow me now to turn to my left and to introduce Ms. Ellen McConnell, Senior Policy Officer at the Protection Division of the IOM. Thank you very much for coming. Ms. McConnell has been supporting the formulation of IOM's approach to protection. Her role involves facilitating diverse forums and providing advice and support to IOM colleagues, both at headquarters and in the regional and country offices all over the world. Since joining IOM in 2003, she has held various roles across multiple duty stations, including Ethiopia, Tanzania, Djibouti, and Morocco. In 2012, Ms. McConnell joined the United Nations mission in Côte d'Ivoire as Office Coordinator for Western Côte d'Ivoire, where she played a key role in post-conflict reconstruction and land tenure matters, working closely with the local authorities, the UN country team, and NGO partners. She returned to IOM in 2017 as Senior Regional Thematic Specialist for Protection and Assistance in Southern Africa. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your views on how migrant smuggling is a global challenge, the dimension that it has today, and how IOM is working with governments to identify victims and dismantle trafficking networks. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. It is a very big honor for me to be here today. to discuss some of the most pressing challenges of our time, so protecting the rights of migrants, combating human trafficking, and addressing the growing threat of migrant smuggling. Migration has the potential to drive development and foster connections between societies, but it also carries significant risks for individuals in vulnerable situations who face exploitation and abuse. At the core of our work in IOM is the protection approach. So our protection approach ensures the safety, rights and dignity of migrants and their communities. And we make sure that those are at the forefront of every action we take. So whether they are fleeing conflicts, seeking better opportunities, migrants face heightened risks of exploitation. I think that is an established fact. Our role is to safeguard them, especially those most vulnerable to trafficking and other abuses. For instance, we note that children make up nearly 1/3 of trafficking victims globally, with some regions even reporting higher percentages of children being trafficked. This clearly emphasizes the need for child-specific protection measures in our efforts. So IOM's protection approach is more than a policy framework. It is a commitment to ensuring that migrants are not treated as mere numbers, but as individuals whose well-being must be our primary concern. It enables us to build protective environments that prevent exploitation before it occurs and respond swiftly when violations do actually happen. So one of the most pressing challenges that we see nowadays is migrant smuggling. It often begins with consent, as you know very well, but it can quickly turn into a journey of exploitation. Many migrants turn to smugglers out of desperation. That has been underlined by Monsieur Cochetel. But then smuggling routes expose them to significant dangers, including extortion, violence, and forced labor. So increasingly, we are seeing that the line between smuggling and trafficking is becoming blurred when migrants are coerced into exploitative situations. So we would not, as per the international definition of trafficking in persons, we would not perhaps qualify them as victims of trafficking. Nevertheless, they go through a lot of physical and sexual violence during their journeys. Smugglers or other criminals often exploit migrants with violence, sometimes as a means of punishment, intimidation, or control. This underscores the urgent need for international cooperation to protect migrants and disrupt smuggling networks. This has been sufficiently mentioned earlier. So examples of this abound, unfortunately, along the central Mediterranean route, the southern route. We have numerous cases of smuggled migrants who have consented to being smuggled, but nevertheless fall prey to these types of violations of their rights. Now allow me to highlight two emerging trends that we have been observing very closely and trying to tackle in the past few years. The first one is that we've seen the rise of trafficking for forced criminality, particularly in Southeast Asia. So individuals, often young men, are lured with false job offers only to find themselves trapped in online scamming operations. So they are actually forced to commit criminal activities under the threat of violence. This form of trafficking has grown in sophistication, with traffickers using digital platforms to recruit and control their victims. I would like to underscore here what Mr. Cochetel was saying, that our governments are definitely behind. When we look at some of these schemes, we see that we are way behind. So let me go back to my example in Southeast Asia. So a significant proportion of those trafficked to forced labor or criminal activities are men. So this highlights a gendered dimension to trafficking in the region and the importance of understanding the specific vulnerabilities of male victims in forced criminality contexts. IOM has been at the forefront of the response to this situation, this crisis, I call it, working with governments and regional partners to strengthen victim identification, not treating them as criminals, but as victims, which they really are. And for that, we need to properly identify them, improve cross-border cooperation, and provide direct assistance to those affected. As these trafficking networks become more complex, we see the need to adapt our strategies to dismantle these operations and protect victims from even further harm. As sometimes they are in debt bondage, their families are in debt bondage, and there are a lot of repercussions to these victims of trafficking. Another increasing phenomenon that we continuously observe is climate change. Now, climate change has become a significant yet under-recognized driver of trafficking in persons. Climate-induced displacement triggered by extreme weather events such as floods, droughts, cyclones, leaves populations highly vulnerable to exploitation, including trafficking. Slow onset climate impacts such as land degradation and desertification, as we see it in my region of origin, in Eastern Horn of Africa, for instance, contribute to long-term displacement and forced migration, further amplifying the risks of trafficking, particularly for women and children. These persons are forced to adopt dangerous coping mechanisms or negative coping mechanisms, such as irregular migration, such as early marriage, which increases their exposure to exploitation. Despite the increasing frequency and severity of climate-related disasters, the nexus between climate change and trafficking is more often than not overlooked in both humanitarian and protection responses. A few recent studies suggest that trafficking may increase by up to 30% during climate-driven disasters, as people are displaced and face severe economic pressures. This gap in understanding leaves climate-displaced populations vulnerable to trafficking, particularly in regions where regular migration pathways and economic opportunities are scarce. IOM is working to address this gap through initiatives which aim to build resilience in communities affected by climate change, helping them to avoid the conditions that lead to exploitation and trafficking. So we focus on populations displaced by environmental crisis, sustainable solutions, and try to provide sustainable solutions that reduce the risk of trafficking and ensure climate resilience are integrated into anti-trafficking efforts. So, in essence, our fragmented approaches, our usual way of doing business, is actually becoming part of the challenge and not part of the solution. We need to have a holistic view, a holistic understanding of the complex interrelations of climate change and trafficking. So IOM has been involved in trafficking, in counter-trafficking work for more than, let's say, 2 decades. As a result, we came up with a comprehensive, what we believe is a comprehensive strategy, or our counter-trafficking theory of change. We focus on 8 key areas of action. The first being case management services for survivors of trafficking. Secondly, capacity development for service providers. The third element is strengthening referral systems and establishing those referral systems where they are non-existent. Fourthly, focusing with on businesses and employers to ensure that recruitment practices are transparent and protect workers from exploitation. The fifth approach looks at enhancing justice systems. So that looks at the prosecution side of things. The sixth one is private sector engagement. So encouraging businesses to prevent human trafficking in their supply chains and promoting corporate responsibility in combating trafficking. The seventh approach looks at developing laws and policies as comprehensively as possible. And finally, looking at expanding research and data collection, which is the objective number one of the Global Compact for Migration. So no need to underscore the importance of it right here. So this is actually a critical component. That is data-driven decision-making. So we want to look at reliable data, which is essential for understanding the scope of trafficking and ensuring that interventions are targeted and effective. A recent development is the work that was jointly done with our sister agency UNODC and ourselves, looking at the international classification standard for administrative data on trafficking in persons. So this is a tool that essentially enables governments to gather consistent, high-quality data, therefore helping us map trafficking networks and improve responses. We call it ICS-TIP. So in closing, the challenges we face in protecting migrants, combating trafficking, and addressing the vulnerabilities created by smuggling are immense. The Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration sets out a vision for international cooperation and shared responsibility. This emphasizes that migration must be managed in a way that is safe, humane, and benefits all. So as we look to the future, we want to be able to adopt a whole of government and whole of society approach to migration governance. Governments, civil society, international organizations, the private sector, and migrants themselves must work together to create migration systems that are inclusive, rights-based, and sustainable. This approach means building policies that protect human rights while also promoting economic opportunities, social inclusion, and climate resilience. So our collective commitment must continue to be not to leave anyone behind. We want to envision a world where migration is not only well managed, but is seen as a force for good, a catalyst for development, innovation, and growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. McConnell. Actually, you did mention the migration as a potential, but to drive for the potential drive for development, but also can represent a risk to vulnerable individuals who migrate. As a matter of fact, you did answer already in your speech some of the questions that came from online. One of them was technology as a tool for pressure against the victims of trafficking, and you mentioned the new forms of trafficking, like the use of digital platforms to pressure the victims, and also the gender dimension related to male victims who are forced into criminal activities. And you also mentioned another thing that came in the question, which is the role of the private sector, and you did mention that as well. So thank you very much for your intervention, and also for sharing with us the areas in which IOM is working on this. I have another question for Mr. Koshitel, also coming from the audience online. What key measures are needed to strengthen the accountability of perpetrators and access to justice?
Well, first again, are we making progress there? Well, the UNODC reports a decrease, 27% reduction in the number of convictions of traffickers worldwide. So that means there are less traffickers being sentenced overall throughout the world. I try to zoom on one of the regions where I work more, the MENA region. We have a decline in the number of detected victims by 40%, so less identification, and that translates into an 18% decrease in the number of convictions just for the MENA region. So that means we're not making progress. Again, I come back to that, we're not making progress. So why trafficking is not taken as seriously, trafficking in person, as drug trafficking, as terrorism, as a transnational crimes that can destabilize countries and that crush human beings. So I think we need a couple of questions around that. Why there is no better information sharing among states? I know Europe is spending a lot of money, debriefing people arriving at the border. Europol keeps that information only for 6 months because that's the data privacy regulation in the European Union. Is that information shared with countries, let's say, upstream all the way through the route? Do we share that information? No, we don't share that information. Why? Because, again, of data privacy consideration or do not have consideration. Fine, but, traffickers share information. If states do not share information, there will be no actionable data for law enforcement agency to do the job. 2 is victims of trafficking. I see everywhere focusing on Africa, so I should not say everywhere, Alem as a better and more global perspective. Victims of trafficking, once you have identified them, the first thing is, yes, quick shelter, maybe a bit of medical assistance, and then quickly back home. Article 8 of the protocol, repatriation of the victim of trafficking as always the best solution. When I question that, it's not always the best solution. The debt, as Adam has explained, has not been paid. Those people will have to continue to pay for the debt. And going back home may create some risk for the person being trafficked, re-trafficked, or for the family, and will have collateral damage. So I'm not saying that every victim of trafficking should get a protective status as a possibility offered in the Palermo Protocol on trafficking in person. But we need to recognize that the victim of trafficking had certain rights in terms of access to justice. And very practically, beside the right-based approach, if we don't use the victims, if we don't protect the victims, when we don't have a case, we don't have evidence. People are returned, and traffickers have a free pass. There's no victim. Or if there is a complaint, there is no longer a victim to testify. So it doesn't go anywhere. So that system is broken and needs to be revisited with serious efforts to protect key witnesses, including relocating them in some places. The Kingdom of the Netherlands has done that with some victims of trafficking on the route to Libya. And to achieve successful prosecution, they had to remove, they use UNHCR resettlement program, they use some of the witnesses there to lead to some successful prosecution. So that's what needs to happen, is to recognize that victims of trafficking do not only have rights, but they can be useful in successful fight against trafficking. Thank you.
James.
Thank you very much. We have a short intervention and then we pass on. Go.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you. Just to complement a little bit on the prosecution side of things. When we work with public prosecutors on prosecuting trafficking cases, it is important to note that it's a very complex crime to gather evidence for. So sometimes the evidence that UNODC gathers shows that a decrease in actual prosecution of trafficking cases. But those cases, more often than not, are trafficked as, for instance, rape cases, a rape case which is much easier to gather evidence for and prove. So, given the complexity of trafficking cases, overwhelmed prosecutors are not very keen to pursue the trafficking dossier. In other words, it means gathering evidence for recruitment, transfer, harbor, receipt of a person. Okay, those are your material elements. And then the means. And then finally your let's say mental element, the mens rea, the exploitation part. And connecting these three becomes very complicated in actual fact when you're working on it in real terms. And that's why many prosecutors resort to, let's say, smaller parts of the trafficking incident, looking at extortion, looking at recruitment, looking at the different elements, and are keen on pursuing the prosecution, which is much more likely to yield better results for them. So these are some of the complexities that we need to be aware of. And working with prosecution requires a lot of diligent, let's say, capacity development, a lot of, let's say, resources as well. Because then you have the whole issue of white-collar crimes also connected to the trafficking rings. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alain. Allow me now to introduce another member of the panel. Just to give you a bit of a wrap-up of what we are going to be doing for the next 22 minutes. We are going to have Simone Capolupo, Head of Knowledge Management of the Department of the Shepherd Organization, the Global Shepherd International Foundation, that has been occupying this position since 2013. He's going to be talking to us about child labor and the different approaches that his organization is adopting to prevent child labor in the context of trafficking. Then we are going to have a video message from a victim of trafficking herself, and then we are going to open to some questions from the audience. We already have 3 requests for comments and statements. So please, Simone, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor De Fabro, for your kind introduction, and good afternoon to you all. I would like to thank you also, all the organizers of this important event, and to having invited us to discuss these important topics. Allow me to just introduce you with a couple of words my organization. The Good Shepherd International Foundation is a non-profit organization based in Rome, founded in 2008. The foundation has been created by the Good Shepherd Sisters, which are a congregation, international congregation of women religious. And we operate in support of the Good Shepherd Sisters in 34 countries in what we call the Global South, so in Africa, Middle East, Latin America, and Asia. Our activities are mainly focused on the elimination of poverty, empowerment of individual and communities, and elimination of any form of violation and abuses, especially those towards children, girls and women. In our experience with the child labor phenomenon, we have realized that the child labor is a multifaceted phenomenon and is strongly interlinked with a lot of other factors. In fact, child labor is rooted in a set of social, political, demographic, economic, cultural factors, with extreme poverty and absence of social protection system being the main ones. In this sense, it is important to face the child protection, the child labor problem, with a system which is somehow multidimensional, holistic, in order to try to address all these aspects that are the root causes of it. As a Good Shepherd International Foundation, we use a model, an approach that informally I can define as the 4 Ps approach. And the 4 Ps stands for prevention, protection, partnership, and prosecution. This model is made out of a set of activities, pillars, and each of these pillars is referred to a specific target group that we want to reach in order to address the problem of child labor. The first pillar refers to the children and is the creation of safe spaces so that the children can access the basic rights that they're denied due to child labor or other forms of human rights violations. This first pillar includes the provision of free education, primary education or low secondary education, recreational activities, skills development for boys and girls that cannot be mainstreamed anymore in the formal school system, legal support, psychosocial and counseling, trauma healing, feeding, and also short-term residential care when needed. The second pillar of our model refers to the families and includes the awareness raising of the child protection aspect to the families and the awareness raising of the parents as responsible for their children. Also, we work with the family in terms of development of social economic opportunities for them, such as alternative livelihood opportunities and income generation. This is because in many countries where we work, due to extreme poverty, children are frequently breadwinner and they work to support the family in their strategy for survival. In this sense, helping the family to have sustainable and continuous sources of funding is a way to cope with livelihood and to avoid them to send their children to work. The third pillar of our approach refers to the wider community and the institutions of the specific target area. And once more, we work on the awareness raising of children's rights in the specific communities and possibly on the mobilization of the community members themselves to promote formal or informal system of child protection from child labor and any other form of child violation. Including the communities in this effort is key also in terms of countering the social acceptance that in certain places we have found out of the child labor. I have heard many times sentences such as, here child labor is normal, it has been always like this, the families doesn't see anything behind it. So when something is socially accepted, it becomes normal, and being normal is much more difficult to be defeated. In this sense, we should be radical in saying that child labor cannot be considered normal anywhere, especially in places where child labor fuels supply chains, going back to what we were saying about the companies that generate every year trillions of dollars. The fourth and last pillar of our model is connected to prosecution and is basically support to those, especially children and girls whose rights have been violated, and so we support them legally or in the judicial system so that their rights are restored, or at least with remediation. Having said that, just a few final remarks. The first one is that child labor cannot be considered in isolation. It's a multifaceted phenomenon and as such should be considered. We cannot look just at the symptoms, we need to look at the root causes of it. The second aspect is connected to the fact that we should put child labor in a wider governance framework. We must include all the stakeholders that have relevance to solve the problem of child labor. This is what we call the circle of care and ring of responsibilities. It's not a matter of NGO, it's wider. We should involve the families, the community, local and national community institutions, international institutions, and any other stakeholders, including the companies. This is also the best way to guarantee sustainability of this form of child protection and fight against child labor. Last but not least, I would like to say that in our experience, we are noticing more and more what has been said already by previous speakers about using new technologies and online system to perpetrate also cases of child abuses, also in the specific sector of child labor connected to commercial sexual exploitation. That's it from my side, and we have prepared a small video.
We're going to share. We're going to share it online with everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Simone, for this. Simone have prepared a video that we're going to make available as well, but this is going to be on your web as well. And you presented the 4Ps approach: prevention, protection, partnership, and prosecution. And I think that this has been a normal theme in the panel, that not one single action or not one single stakeholder can solve the issue. We have some interventions from the floor, and then we are going to air a short video from a victim of trafficking herself.
Survivor.
Yeah, survivor, sorry. A survivor, yes. We're going to give the floor first to His Excellency Ambassador Grazzi from Italy, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank the organizer for this important and timely discussion. The Southern Model of Malta and the Raymond Institute of Humanitarian Law, as well as the distinguished speakers in the panel. Well, Italy considers the efforts of countering human trafficking and migrant smuggling as a priority in the context of the refugee and migration discourse. It's for that reason that during the preparation and the management of the G7 presidency, Italy has taken several initiatives in the framework of the International Conference on Development and Migration held in Rome in July 2023. Italy launched the Rome process with the aim of strengthening our effort in promoting actions against human trafficking and facing the root causes of migration. These efforts were promoted on the occasion of the G7 summit in Bologna, identifying basically two fundamental pillars to articulate a comprehensive approach toward the phenomenon of migration, focusing on the root causes of irregular migration through sustainable development initiatives, economic investment and stabilization effort in partnership with countries of origin and transit. Second, efforts to enhance border management and enforcement and curb transnational organized crime involved in migrant smuggling and trafficking in persons. And finally, organize safe and regular pathways for migration. So finally, and in order to give the possibility also to other speakers to take the floor, we also enhanced the response to the migration crisis in the Mediterranean. Italy operates through a dedicated migration fund to implement the external dimension of our external migration policy, aimed at offering direct assistance to migrants and refugees of their territory, thanks to the capillary presence of international organizations and United Nations agencies on the field, and supporting the institutional capacity of countries of origin and transit in the fight against human traffickers and border control. In such another context of activities related to the fight against human trafficking, the Migration Fund has also intervened through initiatives aimed at addressing the phenomenon of trafficking with multiple projects implemented by IOM and UN Women, especially in Niger, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and other Western countries.
Thank you, Ambassador. I will give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Gutman Hammer from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, sir. Dear colleagues, firstly, big thank you from my side also to all organizers of this event and to all panelists. It is an honor for me to be here on behalf of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, PAM for short. According to IOM, in 2023, it was estimated that more than 3,150 migrants died while attempting to cross the Mediterranean. As of last May, some 1,600 casualties were recorded. However, as you know, the accurate number of deaths recorded in the Mediterranean will never be fully ascertained. Along that journey, especially when passing through key hotspots, migrants are often forcibly detained, coerced into prostitution, or subjected to forced labor, sometimes even before reaching their destination, as we have heard. For this reason, PAN launched last May in Braga an awareness campaign on the fight against trafficking in persons and migrant smuggling in our regions. This campaign is being carried out under the patronage of the UNODC Blue Heart campaign to raise additional awareness of trafficking in persons and migrant smuggling in the Parliamentary Assembly of Mediterranean countries. The campaign aims to foster best practices sharing among members of Parliament on strategies to combat these phenomena, as well as raise awareness of what members of Parliament can effectively do to fight trafficking and reduce vulnerabilities. It also focuses on enhancing regional and international cooperation by encouraging coordinated action through multilateral mechanisms that ensure a unified cross-border approach to preventing trafficking and smuggling. Parliamentarians can focus on preventing trafficking in global supply chains, combating tech-facilitated trafficking, discouraging demand for exploitation, and ensuring comprehensive labor laws that protect all workers, including non-nationals, from exploitation. Migrant smuggling is a transnational crime that demands a robust, coordinated response. That's why PAN's awareness campaign champions reinforced international cooperation through sharing best practices and seeks to bring together all PAN member states to fight a common struggle that plagues our region. Regarding data, PAN disseminated a questionnaire to all member states earlier this year with the aim of collecting best practices to tackle smuggling and trafficking in our region. The support of all our delegations allowed us to gather information regarding the institutional and legal framework on victims' assistance and relevant data in different countries across the Mediterranean. PAN awareness campaign to mobilize urgent actions to protect the lives of vulnerable migrants and foster safer migration pathways is ongoing. Next February, the Assembly will present a report on the issue of trafficking in persons, along with a draft resolution to be debated and hopefully adopted by PAN member states during the 19th plenary session in Rome. I invite you all to answer the call for action and to work together with determination to combat human trafficking and smuggling of migrants in the Mediterranean region. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. The distinguished representative of Switzerland, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And let me thank also the board of Malta and the International Institute of Humanitarian Law for organizing this important event. And thanks to all the distinguished panelists for their insights and powerful testimonies. Human rights violations, conflicts, poverty and lack of prospects are just some of the factors that drive and force people to flee hardship and embark on various journeys facilitated by criminal networks. Thousands of migrants die or disappear every year on these dangerous routes, a tragedy underlined by the alarming figures of the IOM's Missing Migrants project, which is supported by Switzerland. Profit-driven criminal groups exploit the vulnerability of migrants, forcing them to repay exorbitant debts often reliable in host communities and exploiting them into prostitution or forced labor, including forced criminality. Through the use of violence or threats by the perpetrators, these victims of human trafficking are discouraged from reporting their exploitative situation and often remain unidentified as such. If victims remain unidentified, the suffering continues and they are unable to access the rights to which they are entitled to. States have the primary obligation to respect, protect and fulfill human rights, including in the area of anti-trafficking. This requires a comprehensive and multidisciplinary approach based on prevention, protection of victims, prosecution, and partnerships. The 4 Ps I just mentioned. Switzerland is strongly committed to preventing and combating human trafficking through a multi-stakeholder approach and is currently implementing its 3rd National Action Plan against human trafficking. During the Global Refugee Forum 2023, Switzerland announced a Border Society pledge involving national and local authorities and civil society organizations to protect refugees and migrants at risk of trafficking. Switzerland will continue to take specific and effective measures against this violation of human rights in a victim-centered and human rights-based approach, including the strengthening of the rights of the most vulnerable members of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Representative of Belarus.
On behalf of the delegation of Belarus, I'd like to thank the organizers of this very timely and important event. Irregular migration is a common challenge that contributes to people's vulnerability to human trafficking. It can only be solved through concerted efforts and mutual constructive steps. Combating trafficking and protecting its victims have been a priority of my government for many years. Belarus constructively cooperates with many partners and stakeholders in this area, UN agencies, UN members and observers, including the Holy See and the Port of Malta. We look forward to continue this result-oriented cooperation. In recent years, Belarus has been faced with an acute situation of people moving across our western border, fleeing to the EU in search for a better life. Belarus, as a country concerned, will hold a conference on this very topical issue in mid-November. We expect to engage partners in dialogue to find common ground and a long-term solution in this area, and strengthen cross-border cooperation to ensure orderly, safe, and legal migration in the region. I believe experience and best practices presented here can be useful for all of us, as well as for the participants of the conference in Belarus. I thank you.
Thank you for your intervention. Allow me now to ask our colleague Emmanuel from the Order of Malta to share with us a video message from Ms. Kendall Alano, survivor, international speaker, activist, and clinical educator. Kendall is an award-winning international activist, artist, speaker, educator on the impact of trauma, and a survivor of child trafficking and re-exploitation. Kendall uses her voice and art to create pathways to sustainable freedom for survivors of modern-day slavery. As an artist, Kendall is most known for her using iconic red seeds and for her painting titled Survival Voices Lead the Way, which is now housed at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Her work has been featured in CNN International, BBC, Amazon News, and other media shows.
May I begin by giving deep thanks to the permanent mission of the Holy See Geneva, the Order of Malta, the United Nations Commissioner for Refugees, the Permanent Mission of Italy, and the Permanent Mission of Switzerland for the opportunity to address this important event with my voice, lived experience, and expertise. My name is Kendall Alano. I'm an artist, an international activist, an educator on the impacts of trauma, and a survivor of child trafficking and re-exploitation. As a survivor of trafficking, my life has been deeply impacted as a result of my own slavery. And it's my mission to use my voice, knowledge, and art to ensure people all over the world obtain their human right to freedom, and that people impacted by complex trauma worldwide have the resources and the community support they need to heal both their minds and bodies from their lives' adversities. As an artist, I'm most known for using my iconic red seeds and for my painting titled Survivor Voices Lead the Way, which is housed in the United Nations headquarters and is hanging in the office of the President of the General Assembly's boardroom in order to foster dialogue on solutions to trafficking in persons. I also consider my speaking performative and have had the honor of addressing these pressing human rights issues globally and in different cultural contexts. It's an honor to make a virtual address at the Migrants, Refugees, Migrant Smuggling, and Trafficking in Persons event today at the United Nations offices in Geneva, Switzerland. We must work to better explore and understand the real intersectionalities that are driving increasing numbers of migrants, refugee flows, and vulnerable persons becoming victims of modern-day slavery. I recently had the pleasure of speaking at the French Embassy on the sexual exploitation occurring in conflict zones. While we know war drives sexual exploitation, we also know war is a catalyst for people to flee their countries of origin, thus becoming migrants. Secondarily, we understand climate change's role in driving refugee flows as climate-affected individuals seek food-producing land, water, safe temperatures, and a climate which can sustain their human right to life. We cannot address these intersectionalities without also highlighting global poverty and lack of economic opportunity as an additional cause that drives mass movement of people that seek opportunity within or outside of their international borders. In the human trafficking prevention sector, fellow experts are well aware of how vulnerable to trafficking individuals and communities are that lack any pathway to decent work and economic independence. When these populations actively seek work from a place of desperation, they are more likely to be met by traffickers that come along with glamorous false job offers, resulting in trickery, deception, and ultimately situations of indefinite slavery for these individuals. This is why governments around the world must not overlook the importance of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 8, which calls for creating pathways to decent work and to target this goal by the year 2030, which will aid in the prevention of exploitation and sale of human beings. To those outside of our field, they may see slavery in a historical framework, but we know there is more slavery in our world today than ever before in human history. And the Global Slavery Index indicates we now have 50 million people around the world currently being trafficked. Make no mistake, and let me be clear, that global poverty, war, and climate change are all driving incidences of modern-day slavery and at rapid levels. We must also highlight the UN Sustainable Development Goal target number 3.4, which calls on governments to promote mental health. In the context of trafficking survivors, we must push for more dialogue on not only understanding the unique psychopathology that results from slavery, but also call on universities to produce more needed ethical and trauma-informed clinicians to serve this population. More research on complex trauma and dissociation, innovation of care, and for governments to contribute funds to create access to cost-free care. We cannot allow trafficking survivors to be sold against their will and then left to pay medical bills directly produced as a result of the crimes their traffickers committed against them. After exit from trafficking, these survivors are not truly free, as they then become slaves to their own tremendously difficult recovery. And even if left unemployed, in truth and in reality, their full-time jobs then become managing post-traumatic flashbacks of the lives they lived, experiencing the darkest and the worst humanity had to offer them. Debilitating narratives of enslavement that can also leave them disabled. In this context, I want to celebrate the OSCE for their recent report and publication on the nexus of disability and human trafficking, which I consulted on and contributed my art to. When I gave a keynote at the OSCE Human Dimensions Conference in Poland, I called for the World Health Organization to consider creating a new international classification of disease code to formally identify the unique pathology of slavery. This needs to be done to give scientific credibility and global visibility to the real lifetime impacts slavery has on individuals who should have remained free. My suggestion would be for the World Health Organization to develop a new ICD code that serves as an umbrella code where other pre-existing codes can be placed under in order to highlight the full-scale picture of the clinical presentation that results from contemporary slavery. We cannot allow survivors in our country's borders to remain internally displaced people, lacking access to clinical care, restorative justice, and social reintegration. In the collection of the Louvre Museum in Paris is a sculpture titled The Dying Slave by artist Michelangelo, a sculpture of a man captured at the time of his own death, putting an end to his struggle for existence after the effects of his own bondage. We cannot let these survivors face the same fate. My dream is to create artwork to foster sustainability of dignified lives of survivors of slavery, to drive solutions to combat our world's most pressing human rights issues today. When we do not have the answer, I believe the answer lies within art. I recently gifted artwork titled The Plan to the OSCE and shipped it to the Hofburg Palace in Vienna to the OSCE offices, where it now hangs. This artwork features my iconic red seats and is a step-by-step plan for how governments can support survivors of slavery living with trauma-based disabilities. This week, when I was out walking my dog, I thought about the word plan. P-L-A-N. What could this stand for? Then it occurred to me, people like action now. And these people are survivors of slavery looking for resources to obtain sustainable freedom and full healing. Governments must take action now. And as an artist with lived experience of slavery, it's my social responsibility to also take action now. I know dreams are just wishes without plans, and I'm currently making a second plan to develop a major art initiative to ensure people around the world remain free. When this video airs in the UN Geneva, I will be on the ground in Vienna, Austria, having meetings with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the French Embassy, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe to take steps to develop a plan to create a major art initiative to scale needed impact and to visit my dear friends in this fight for freedom. I would have loved to be there in person with you all today in Geneva, but I want to thank each and every one of you for all the work you're doing each day to ensure migrants, refugees, and vulnerable individuals affected by complex global issues remain free from trafficking. In closing, as I record this here in Chicago, Illinois, United States, I'm reminded that I live and do this art and activism from the land of Lincoln. I will end with a quote by President Abraham Lincoln. If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. A very big thank you to everyone today in attendance who is working to make this world right. It was a pleasure to be with you all in this capacity today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. I open the floor in case there are questions and remarks. I would like to then thank our panelists, Vincent Cochetel, Alan McConnell. Yeah, we have a question. No. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you because of the camera.
Is it okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Sorry. First of all, thank you so much. My question comes both as a board member of the British Refugee Council, but also as a friend and member of the San Remo Institute. So one of the challenges we've seen in our national context in the UK is the deliberate conflation of policy level between smuggling and trafficking. Now this is done to very cynically justify the further criminalisation of victims, but also to vilify those generally making irregular journeys. Now, this increasingly means that laws designed to protect survivors, such as the Historic Modern Slavery Act, is now being undermined and rewritten or reinterpreted in such a way that many people who are currently in detention are considered both perpetrators and their own victims. So my question is, as civil society or survivors or other stakeholders, how do we overcome this increasingly hostile climate
to ensure those who most need protection are able to receive it. And it's open to whoever wants to answer it. Thank you.
Well, I don't know, I can only respond for as a representative of a humanitarian organization. We need to look at it as four things. It's a key protection risk now, we know, for IDPs. It's a key protection risk for migrants crossing borders. It's a key protection risk for asylum seekers and refugees. We have the data to support that trafficking in persons is a key protection risk. So it's not a work for specialists. You can always have specialists on everything, but it affects the life of people. It can lead to loss of life. There's a very serious impact on people and communities. So we need to treat it as a core protection issue. And it's not like that. It's not mainstream at all in our response in humanitarian settings. So that's one problem. About the conflation of smuggling and trafficking, I agree with you. We need to be careful here with the narrative. The legal definition serves one purpose. Where I come from is on the African routes leading to North Africa. The closer you get to areas of conflict, you have a level of coercion. But it's very difficult to speak anymore about smugglers. The smuggler becomes a trafficker. And we need, I think, also to change a bit the way we approach it. Sometimes we look at people who are victims of trafficking as people who have done something wrong. You know, they put themselves into that trap. You did not need to take a smuggler. And then yeah, fine. Okay, I agree with that reasoning. On the other hand, let me use that example. I'm an Eritrean refugee in France. My wife and my kids are a refugee in Eastern Sudan, in Kassala, in a camp. So to get family reunification in France, which is not a legal pathway, it's a right. You have a right to family reunification. How do I get a pass to go outside the camp? To go to the French embassy to file an application for family reunification. Well, I can't get the pass. Strict encampment policy. I cannot go to the embassy, there is no more embassy. So I'm going to be told, you need to go to another French embassy, maybe in Uganda. Well, no, I can't cross border. So what do I do to get access to that right? Well, if I'm wealthy, or if I don't have resources, I'm going to borrow money. I'm going to buy smuggler services. Because at the end of the day, that's the reality that we refuse to see. It works. It works for many people. If there is a market, it's because there are successful outcomes. So unless we are serious also about creating credible alternative to that, we're not going to defeat the business model of smugglers. They are more successful. And while we are talking about those alternative pathways and legal pathways to create, let's be serious. They're so small. I mean, beside Italy and few European countries, I'm not talking about the US here, vis-à-vis Africa, nothing is happening. There's no legal pathways. They don't exist. So we can't responsibly and credibly talk to people about considering alternative pathways. They don't exist. So, you know, there's a long life ahead for smugglers and traffickers. We have no alternative to offer at this stage.
I fully agree with what has just been said. I think it's a very complex situation. A lot has been said also the confliction between smuggling and traffickers. I think it's also important to promote counter narratives, like what has been said, to share them and make them alive, so that people can understand and what are the real problems, the real situation that people are, the traffic victims are facing. In a way, some counter narratives, concretely and examples, show what are they suffering, and to spread them in order to make people understand what the real situation these people are in. And also to try to understand and to push and to insist on the fact that, as was said earlier, it is not first and foremost a criminal issue, but a human issue, a humanitarian issue. But I think that on a cultural level, on a whole society approach, a societal level, I think is essentially key in order to reach the population and to help the narrative change within the population, because finally it is the population which prompts politicians to adopt a different kind of approaches that unfortunately are a threat for sometimes for trafficking victims.
Thank you very much for your answers, and thank you, Mark, for your question. Apologies once again, I couldn't see you from here. Just before passing the word to Professor Bete, I want to thank my fellow panelists, Vincent Cochetel, Alem, Makonnen, Simone, Capolupo, and of course Kendall on the video, Kendall Alaimon, with her and her words, people like action now. I would like to pass on the floor to our convener and our organizer. Thank you very much, Professor Bete.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claudio, for this wonderful moderation. So finally, I would like to express my gratitude to all the speakers, to all participants, to the permanent missions of Italy, the Holy See, and Switzerland for their co-sponsoring this event, and to the Sanremo Institute, especially the Department of Refugee Law. This is just one step. We have a long way to go to protect refugees and migrants from human trafficking. And just give you this slide, but you could find this in the handouts, and if you're interested, I could even email it to you. There is a long list of international law instruments which could be used to protect migrants and refugees in peace and war. And I think we should use all of them. Then the other key word is definitely, Emanuele, to use cooperation, because definitely we cannot do things alone. Not one organization, not one government, not even one religion. We need to work together, and indeed involve all actors, including survivors, because as you've seen, as you heard, I must say, the real experts are actually survivors. So, actually, we will use all international instruments to protect them, and we will only succeed if we work together. So, thank you very much to all of you for being here, and I wish you a very good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you.